Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nuggets News. Today we welcome back an old friend, and that is Sam, who's a bit of a guru in the XRP space. We had a really great chat last time. Some of you will remember where we had a really open and honest discussion about the utility of XRP, and Sam obviously asked me about the utility of Bitcoin and Ethereum as well. So we're going to have a bit of a catch up. It's probably been 6 months, maybe more. I can't really remember,
Too
but
long.
a lot has happened in that time. So we wanted to come together because it is really hard to have these honest discussions in a respectful manner, and there's a lot of tribalism out there. So hopefully this can be a little bit of part two, but probably check out part one of that interview if you haven't already. So welcome back to the channel, Sam.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here and looking forward to the discussion as always.
Where should we start? For people that didn't maybe watch the first part, maybe just give us the quick version of your background and how often you do videos and what your focus is.
Okay, so I have a background in telecom, not so much finance, but I was aware of Bitcoin in the early days. When it was under $1 or $2. I come from a libertarian anarchist background. That crowd kind of was pretty involved in Bitcoin in the early days. Some friends of mine are from that group, kind of brought me into a Facebook group and told me, about XRP and Monero with the hopes that I would start making videos about it. And they didn't tell me that, but their plan worked.
Yeah.
So now I have a YouTube channel, To The Lifeboats, and I make videos, talking about mostly Ripple and XRP, but really I did a drug war rant the other day just because I watched something that really kind of ticked me off. So I spoke my mind.
I do the same every now and again. Probably every few months I do a non-crypto video, and
Yep.
sometimes people don't like it, but a lot of people do appreciate
I don't care.
it. Yeah. All right, so where should we start? I mean, there's been lots happening. Probably from my side of things, we've seen the talk about MoneyGram and Ripple, and the $50 million investment? There was another 10 or 11 million last night. Do you want to run us through everything that's been happening there?
Sure. So I think the first time we had talked, I should have gone back and watched it, but they initially had called down 20 or 30 million of the 50 million. They've since called down the remainder. So Ripple has bought $50 million worth of MoneyGram shares at $4.10. What was announced this morning is the actual numbers on Ripple created this program to build this base level of liquidity. So they have to find a way to bootstrap RippleNet and get it going and get, enough payments flowing so that they can start bringing in more players. It's kind of a chicken and an egg between you got to have the liquidity to attract the market makers.
Yeah.
The market makers want the liquidity before they're going to come and enter the space. MoneyGram's like the perfect, catalyst for that. So they can bring them in, they can send them as much volume as they want. A couple months ago, that was 1.5 million a day. Right now, I think it's closer to 10 million. I'm not sure the exact number. The total remittance flows going from US to Mexico, which is between 30 and $36 billion a year. Bitso is handling via ODL. They are handling, it was 3.5%, and I think it's like 6.5%, 7% now. So tremendous growth there, and that was just in the last month or so that it's practically doubled. They've started launching other corridors and so forth. But going back to that 11 point whatever million dollars, 11.4, I think. What Ripple did is they created a program with metrics for MoneyGram to create and maintain base levels of daily liquidity to kind of create that floor of transaction volume.
Yeah.
And those payments, it was disclosed because they went to the SEC and said, here's what we've got. They had been recording this as revenue. The SEC came back and said, no, this should be contra expense, which is where you pay for something up front and then you basically get reimbursed. And that's how they wanted them to record it. Of course, on the earnings call this morning, both the CEO and the CFO kind of laughed at having to call it and record it as contra expense because it really is revenue. So that caused them to miss their revenue projection and kind of skewed things a little bit, and it's not really a great way to record it because it really is a revenue stream for them, but it's what the SEC told them to do.
Cool.
So it was, I think, 3.4 million in in Q4 or Q3, and then it was 8.9 million, I believe, in Q4. So, pretty significant. I mean, it means, and they said it will continue to increase, but not at that same rate. So Ripple's probably spending $40 to $50 million a year to drive that base level of liquidity and get their RippleNet sort of jump started, which tells me they're expecting some pretty tremendous volumes, because they're not just going to throw that money at it without expecting a return. They are pretty smart people.
Yeah, and again, from my side of the fence, I think I even read somewhere that the US-Mexico corridor peaked out at like 10% through.
It might be.
So that's...
Well, okay. I think what you're remembering is MoneyGram was sending 10% of its volume from the US to Mexico over ODL. They've since, I think they're up around 15% now. But as far as total remittance flow between the US and Mexico, it's, I think, 7 point something percent roughly.
So either way, I'd say that's a big positive. So one of the things that I was critical of is, are we actually going to see XRP token being used? Are we going to see this liquidity being bootstrapped? And that's, for people at home, that's what ODL stands for, the on-demand liquidity, having these pools of XRP tokens at either end for people to do these instant transfers. So that's definitely a positive step in the right direction. I guess I would say, what you spoke about there with how that goes on the balance sheet, is that an issue for all people that are planning on using this system and having to buy the XRP for the ODL? Is this going to hurt their books? Is that a bad thing in the short term, or?
No, this is specific to MoneyGram because
the shares,
they're really like the beachhead account that Ripple has established to help them kickstart the network. They're not going to be paying other customers to use RippleNet.
Okay.
They're really the ones that are going to like bring everybody else in and establish a floor that they can build upon.
Yeah. The other thing that I think I tweeted about, and we put this down as something to speak about, was that payment was definitely to incentivize and bootstrap the network and get MoneyGram using XRP. Recently, there was an article going around saying that MoneyGram have still chosen to use Visa's FastSend product or something like that. Is that a different use case, or why have they chosen to use this Visa instant payment system?
So they have three major initiatives that they've been talking about over the last few quarters. One is digitizing everything and moving more things to web-based interface. They have their walk-in business, as they describe it, which is the agent locations at Walmart and all over the world, which is their agent network. And then they have their online business, which they hadn't really done much with. A couple of years ago, the U.S. market just cratered with Venmo coming out and offering free transfers.
Yeah.
And that was a huge chunk of their business. So their stock suffered. The whole industry kind of went down with that. And so they've been working to kind of reinvent themselves. They've created all of these digital initiatives. They announced a loyalty program today. And they're just trying to kind of build things back without that huge segment of what used to be, a big part of their business. Tell me your question again. I got lost there.
When MoneyGram chose to use this Visa FastSend thing,
Okay, so Visa was another of their three main initiatives, and of course Ripple's the third. Visa Direct is kind of about linking into bank accounts and sending money to a phone number, dramatically simplifying the process from what they have today. And I think what that article focused on is, well, yeah, they're using Visa, but how are they doing the cross-border transaction? So you still have, and MoneyGram is still using their existing system. That was one of the things that came out of the call today. And I put in a request to talk to somebody from MoneyGram. I don't know if they're going to do that or not, but they've been using ODL not on a per payment basis, but kind of as a wholesale tool that they have, to where they still have their existing Nostro Vostro structure, but now with ODL, they can top it off. And in 60 seconds, they can have money deposited in their bank account in Mexican pesos. Yeah. So that's a really tremendously powerful tool that saves them a lot of money, and they don't have to forecast 3 days out anymore, and so on. Um, I'm getting lost again.
No, you're right. I was just going to say the other product that I've seen recently is Revolut. Have you read much about this? This is a
A
product
little bit.
that gives you like a card or even a digital card. So it's basically that credit card, and you can go from one currency to another. And so there's so many payment rails or products coming out. It really is just amazing. And I've seen all these central banks that are starting to, we read in the news, central banks are trying their own currencies, and some of them are using private forks of Ethereum, this, that, and the other. And always in the comments, that my XRP followers are saying it still has to bootstrap the network with liquidity, or it has to be the payment rails, or who's going to connect all these. But I still haven't actually heard anyone say that that's the issue. A lot of these trials are saying that, yeah, it's all going really well, and it's not using XRP at this stage. So does that point sort of make sense?
It does. Anybody creating the crypto is the easy part. I mean, there's what, 5,000+ of them. Obviously, that's not a difficult step these days. In order to have something that's used around the world, a lot of people will criticize Ripple or XRP, well, Ripple, the company, because they hold so much XRP, and well, it's worth all this money and this and that. Well, what was it worth when they created it? Next to nothing. And it was Ripple and their work that has created the value that it has today. And it's one thing to have a token. It's another thing to have all the tools and the infrastructure in place to be able to use it for something like cross-border payments. But then it's a whole nother level to, build that liquidity. And that's why obviously they're about to start spending $50 million a year. And he said that contract goes out to 2023. So, we're talking $150 million roughly that they're going to spend in order to bootstrap that network. And who has the resources, and has a team even working on something like that? I mean, Ripple hired Miguel Valles, the guy who used to run the order books for the CME, to come over and do this for Ripple and work with the market makers and incentivize them to help bootstrap liquidity and get them into the ecosystem.
Yeah.
That's a lot of work.
The other thing that I'm sort of thinking is, when you say who has the infrastructure and the ability to do this, I know all the central banks are getting together, particularly the G20 nations, and talking about what's our strategy here. Are they the ones that have the printing press, and they can say, well, we're all going to have our own stable coins. We're going to use this network. We are going to print money out of thin air and create this liquidity that we each have to hold with these different currency reserves. Is that possible, or what are the issues they're going to run into? Like, why are they going to have to turn to XRP in your mind?
Okay, so with CBDCs, there are large corridors like US to the euro and others that are very liquid.
Yeah.
And I think they could be very successful doing a CBDC to CBDC order book where they're exchanging and they don't touch XRP. But there are, 180 different plus countries out there with different currencies. And, not all of them are that liquid. And that's where you need a global bridge asset like XRP to consolidate all of the inbound and all of the outbound flows into one asset so that they can sort of cancel each other out. And then you settle up the difference with market makers coming in to, properly incentivize to rebalance the system on an ongoing basis. Could CBDCs potentially take some business away from what Ripple's doing? Sure they could. At the end of the day, though, they're a walled garden. Everybody's trying to get out from under the US dollar because of the unfunded liabilities, because of the out of control spending. Russia has gone away, and Putin's been very public in his criticisms along those lines. They created BRICS to try and do exactly that. There are other countries that are trying to trade direct fiat to fiat currency, but if it gets too big, it ends up creating problems in that economy. There's a reason they still have to use the dollar as the global bridge asset, even though they don't like it.
And it's not just Russia and China anymore, as you say. It was Bank of England, one of their allies, Mark Carney, coming out and saying that USD has too many privileges. Most people, have you heard of the US dollar milkshake theory, which basically says that because the US dollar is a world reserve currency, all these smaller currencies, countries have their debt denominated in US dollars and oil's traded in US dollars. So they've all got a straw sucking in this milkshake. They constantly need US dollars to pay back their debts and for use. So it puts this artificial demand. And so at the moment, there's not enough US dollars in the system despite how many that are being printed. So there's this US dollar milkshake theory where if you had a neutral currency or a basket of currencies to spread out the load, you'd have these more even currency wars, or particularly the forex rate. But this is why the US dollar just keeps going up and up and up, because there's constantly this demand, which people are now saying, well, that's not really fair. You guys actually wouldn't have such a strong economy, stock market, and all these privileges unless we all constantly needed to buy your dollars. So that's definitely, I agree, that's so changing.
So there's the finance person from Bitso, which is the largest exchange in Mexico. They're the XRapid or ODL partner for Ripple, and they're the ones that MoneyGram is selling the XRP on to facilitate their cross-border payments. She was on stage at Swell, which is Ripple's user conference, and that's exactly one of the things she talked about. She's like, there's so much demand in our region for these services, for cross-border payments, that they're just not big enough, they're not liquid enough. So they have to make multiple hops through, the Mexican peso and then through the US dollar, and then they can get it to where they need it to go. And that makes it way, way more expensive. And so I think exactly what you're describing there, as this kind of comes online, I think the US dollar is going to be in big trouble because, there's so much demand. First off, there's all those dollars outside of the United States that are eventually going to come back when that's, when it's no longer the reserve currency. But I think there's a huge amount of demand from all of these smaller countries that have to hop through the US dollar, that don't want to. It's more expensive for them to do so. And when they have a better option, I think RippleNet is going to be that option. You're going to see a tremendous reduction in the demand for the dollar.
Remind me to talk about Uniswap and that liquidity provider market maker thing when we get to the Ethereum section as well.
Okay.
But the next thing I did want to ask you about was the IPO that Brad's floated. I think his exact words were, we wouldn't be first, but we wouldn't want to be last. And a lot of people have taken that as, within the next 12 to 24 months, if we start to see crypto companies IPO and list on the stock market, Ripple would want to be up there and doing that. Now, I just see that as, hold on, guys, you've been selling hundreds of millions of dollars of XRP tokens. The value is meant to be in this network. Now you're talking about raising $1 billion as a company. And then once you have shareholders and a board, they are really going to incentivize all profits need to come to shareholders, and the network becomes a second priority. So I'd love to get your thoughts on all that.
I am not a fan of the IPO at all.
Okay.
I agree with a lot of the points you're making, and I put out some tweets about this, and a lot of people were not happy with me, but I speak my mind regardless. My take on it is like, look at who they're working with. They've been in the room and presented to Augustin Carlson, the head of the BIS. Christine Lagarde was sitting at the same table as him. Half the central bankers, you have Jacob, the chairman of JP Morgan International, was in the room. They're working with central banks. They're working with commercial banks, payment processors, community banks, credit unions. I mean, you name it. There's not somebody that they couldn't get a meeting with and sit down in front of. So, what exactly is this IPO going to give them? And in my mind, it's a huge wealth transfer from the middle class to the early investors. It's going to make most of them billionaires. And in the process, Ripple's going to raise some money, but they're sitting on $500 million right now. What real benefit is it going to give to, their adoption? And what Brad has come back and said is it gives us flexibility to hire people and grow the company and this and that. It's like, yeah, okay, but I'm not seeing it.
Yeah, okay.
And that's an
Now,
unpopular opinion.
yeah, no, I didn't know that you'd answer like that either, and I'm sorry about that. This fly in my office. It's
That's
very
okay.
very Australian to have a fly over summer in my office, but
At least you don't have
um,
any deadly snakes crawling around. There's lots of animals that want to kill you down there.
most is it 9 out of the most 10 poisonous animals in Australia, something like that. Anyway, anything else that's been happening on the XRP front that we haven't touched on, good or bad?
I mean, there's just a lot of like broadening out of the ecosystem as far as tokenizing assets, and you mentioned some of the exchange Kava. I think that's exchanging between currencies. There's the bridge to Ethereum that Xspring announced that they had this hackathon, and they've created bounties for basically creating a connector to ILP. I did a video. There was a ILP like working call that they had where one of the guys from Spring gave a presentation on this payment API, and it was really fascinating. It's basically the idea is you have this token or a vendor, say you want to sign up for Netflix or something like that. They'll send you a request and you create this token that says they can access your account in these ways under these terms, and you approve that and you send it back. And it could be for an ongoing subscription, but when you decide you're done with it and you want to cancel, you just log in, bring up your wallet and you cancel it, and it's done. You don't have to go tell Netflix or anything like that. And it really kind of turns the existing paradigm on its head and puts the user in control. That was really pretty exciting. And I think that is what Google announced they're implementing. Uh, I'm not sure what the timetable was, but they're implementing for Apple Pay down the road.
Cool.
So
Okay. So
it's
that
happening.
so that is possible to do already on Ethereum. I'm just thinking of on some of these decentralized exchanges or even some of these smart contracts, you can sort of pre-sign a transaction and say, "I'm happy to sell this token for this price or play this game at this time," and
Mhm.
then when it all matches up, you've kind of pre-signed it and it executes. We'll get into Ethereum in just a sec, though. But the thing that I really liked and I interviewed was the Sologenic guys. So to
Yes.
me, when Ripple are playing around in this space of, they're working with the regulators and they're very much already trying to integrate in the financial system. I think that is a good direction for them to take, because I think something that's caught on really slowly is that STO, the security token world. For people that haven't heard, Malta was meant to be this crypto safe haven, and they're not
Yeah.
giving out any licenses there. They've had change of leadership. So I think listing securities on a new platform, that is a direction that kind of suits Ripple and XRP, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. There's a lot of things happening along those lines where it really is starting I was really surprised by that wallet. And I guess the difference I would say between having a smart contract on Ethereum that can replicate that functionality is this is getting it integrated into the payment standard for the web.
Mm.
And what one of the other things since we last talked that Xspring, or Spring as it's supposedly pronounced, has done is they have a developer team with at least 20 to 30 people. There's a picture that David Schwartz posted, and they're working to build APIs and toolkits and SDKs and so forth to make it easy for companies to be able to plug into this to the ILP and to start using it with their existing systems. So,
Yeah.
I think things are going to start happening very quickly here.
Fantastic. Well, anything else we think of, we can come back to later. But do you want to
Okay.
go down the road of Ethereum or Bitcoin next, or up to you?
Let's talk Ethereum, because there's this whole Ethereum 2.0 that I read up on, and it seems like it's starting to kind of come together. I want to run my understanding of it by you and hopefully get some clarification and correction. So,
Yeah.
uh, first off, they're moving to, they kind of describe it as, well, we're moving to proof of stake. But from the way I look at it, they have the Ethereum 1 blockchain. They've created this Ethereum 2 blockchain that's going to run in parallel, and they're almost exporting the wealth from the Ethereum 1 blockchain to to the 2.0 to create what seems to me almost like a Lightning network. I mean, I know it's not, but it's, you stake, what is it, 32 Ethereum, which is about $8,000 in order to create your node. And then you have to run a server, which you can do, it could be a laptop at that scale, but you're going to be one of the smaller fish in the pond. It seems like, I know they're trying to avoid centralizing it and so forth, but they're trying to also, just like Bitcoin with Lightning Network, fix their scaling issues, but they're almost jumping ship from Ethereum 1 and leaving that as, well, this is the ICO platform, and moving over to Ethereum 2. And they have this beacon chain, which is what when you move your Ethereum into the smart contract, it registers you on the beacon chain, and then people can start using your server. Can you clarify on that, or
Yes.
what am I missing?
So originally Ethereum wanted to implement proof of stake like in 2016, and then this, that, and the other happened, and anyway, they're finally sort of ready to do this, and they decided it's going to be a lot cleaner for the entire community now that there's thousands of projects and smart contracts if we make this new beacon chain, Ethereum 2.0, and to begin with we'll make a one-way bridge so people can send their Ethereum to the new beacon chain, and that might be called like Beacon Eths or something like that. You might see it as BF, so people know that there's a difference. Now, eventually there'll be a two-way bridge, so you can take it back. But just to begin with, it's going to be like a test environment, and that will be the first proof of stake Ethereum blockchain. Now, from that, they want to do further improvements and eventually shard the network, so they're going to break it down. But we can get to that later. But in terms of the proof of stake side of things, anyone with 32 ETH can run their own node. But we interviewed Rocket Pool the other day, and there's a lot of projects that are now doing like decentralized staking pools. So if I only have 1 ETH, I can pool with other guys, and it's the same as joining a mining pool to get the rewards.
That's exactly what went through my head when I started thinking about it. Okay, what's going to happen? Some guy that has access to a hosting environment that can host a server is going to create a pool, and then you just throw whatever Ethereum you have into that pool, and we've recreated the mining pools.
And in the test environment, I think the numbers are crazy. Like there's already 10,000 nodes or something silly, so it's already fairly decentralized there.
Okay.
Once they get that all running bug-free and whatnot, we move to phase 1 and phase 2, and eventually they want to shard the network. So you sort of have, I think they've reduced the number down to maybe 12 or 24. Originally they wanted a lot higher. So you have sort of little teams that all have their own, you might have 1,000 nodes, hopefully more than that per shard. So it's still decentralized, and they're all talking to each other as well. And at that stage, the old Ethereum chain will hopefully become one of those shards as well. So they're not leaving it behind. Okay. They're just sort of having this test environment, make sure everything's okay, and then they want to integrate it eventually.
So I wasn't clear on the whole, like I understand the sharding concept and what they're doing, but is that almost the equivalent of like a group of payment channels? Or are you going to be able to do transactions between shards? How does that work?
That is one of the hardest problems, and I believe that they have now solved that in theory. They've written the code and whatnot, and now it's just about testing it. But yeah, that cross-shard communication, that's like the bleeding edge stuff that Vitalik's still doing presentations on and whatnot. But that again is separate to going into second layer things like state channels.
Yeah, the four phases and so forth. Okay.
Yeah.
And then the rewards, they're expecting like 2.5% to 5%. Does that mean fees are going to be in that range, or is that or will it be much lower because that's that's going to be hundreds of transactions using the same Ethereum sloshing back and forth?
The hope is that this is going to make things a lot cheaper for most smart contracts, so fees should be getting lower and lower, but we've already seen DeFi grow and a lot of things grow, so there's enough there that it's going to be a good incentive. But they also want to burn any fees, so you pay the people that are staking the same as like a block reward from Bitcoin. They get newly minted ETH, and they're talking about that inflation being 2 or 5%, so you've got to create an incentive to keep the network secure. But they're also talking
Yes.
about burning all these fees, which they're hoping going to be around 2 to 5%. So the net issuance of Ethereum will actually be zero. And at that point, it becomes more scarce than even Bitcoin. And that's why
Hmm.
someone wrote a paper the other day talking about how, well, if you're bullish on the halving and this monetary premium, then very much ETH is money. And it was written from someone that I believe was pretty favorable to Bitcoin, if not a maximalist, and it really surprised a lot of people. So that's probably still maybe a year away. But at that point, I believe we start to have some pretty interesting conversations about if ETH is money and this, that, and the other.
Yeah. My perspective on Ethereum has really shifted in the last, like, since we talked last time. Uh, I think it certainly has first mover advantage when it comes to smart contracts. Ripple has their Codius smart contracts platform, which kind of shares some similarities there, but it like had this false start and they shut it down, and then they've since reallocated people to it. And I think it will become a contender down the road. Will it be big enough and grow fast enough to displace? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I logged in and looked at like, okay, what are the top applications that are running, or dApps that are running on the chain? And it's really gaming, which I think is that's a valid use case. Decentralized gaming is going to be huge. That's becoming a sport, and it will, you'll have video game players that are every bit as popular as NFL athletes 10, 20 years from now, no
Yeah.
doubt.
Yeah.
But then the other ones were like exchange dexes for ERC20 tokens and things along those lines. So the thing that would still give me pause is like, it's not a commercial mortgage platform or something along those lines. That's more of a business oriented, tying in with the traditional finance system. And I think that's what Ripple's aiming at. And so
Yeah, so a few things that are already good to do on Ethereum are those that don't have high transactions. So, we saw some bonds being issued on Ethereum, and you're only issuing a bond and redeeming it every so often. It doesn't really matter about the transactions per second. Gods Unchained was a card game that's kind of like a Magic the Gathering on Ethereum style thing. Now, they've solved the scaling puzzle, but that's not open source, that part of what they're doing. So we've actually got all these card moves, and these are all happening as on-chain transactions, but it's not taking up any block space. So maybe they'll share that secret source, whatever they've done, but they've got a high number, hundreds or thousands of transactions happening, people playing these card games. They're the number one dApp on Ethereum now, and it's not clogging the blockchain versus CryptoKitties, which bloated it and had far less transactions happening. So we're kind of seeing projects solve scaling problems, as well as some that are using the state channels and RAID network, which is like the Lightning network. So some of them are trying to solve it with second layer. Some of them appear to have already solved it on the main chain. But then we've got sharding and these other improvements where we're hoping to be able to have, I think ZK Snarks alone, that privacy technology takes it to 500 transactions per second on Ethereum. So lots of cool things happening. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
The Uniswap thing, before I forget, or have you got any other questions about all that?
No, I'm just wondering if there's anything else you would add to the discussion.
Yeah, the Uniswap thing I spoke about before. So at the moment, they've got this DEX where you get paid the fee, so you get incentivized to provide liquidity. So you might have some Ethereum laying around, and there's a high demand for Kyber at the moment. So you can pitch your Ethereum and you split it up into half Ethereum, half Kyber, and you kind of add liquidity to the books, and you get paid for that pair whenever someone trades it. So where I see this kind of going, I think we touched on this last time, is there's lots of projects now that like synthetics that are creating synthetic assets. So they've got synthetic Aussie dollar, euro, Japanese yen. Now we've got these synthetic type products. Now we've got people that are incentivizing liquidity. They're the kind of things that now we're waiting to see if that can grow and bootstrap the network to become payment rails of some description for these smart contracts and for DeFi. But that's still pretty early.
Okay. And I think, like this bridge to Ethereum thing that was just announced, I think that's going to end up being, it'll go through ILP and settle, because, like it or not, Ripple has interfaced with the traditional finance system and the fiat systems and so forth. MoneyGram and ODL is all about connecting all the way down to end user bank accounts. So they're going to have that settlement solution, and if you can seamlessly move through the ILP from ETH to whatever else you need to, I think that's going to be the way they go.
Yeah. Some other cool things that have happened. We've got the Ethereum name service just got integrated into Coinbase today, so I don't have to know your address.
Like a vanity
Yeah,
wallet
so I
name.
can send
Okay.
it to Sam, Green Eggs and Ham, or whatever. Handshake just launched, which I don't know why they need their own blockchain and their own token, but they're doing a similar thing on Bitcoin for the vanity addresses. But do you want to get into Bitcoin now? I know you got a few issues there.
Yeah, so we talked about this briefly before we got started. I read through the study that was put together where they basically simulated the Lightning Network as best they could with whatever publicly available information they could scrape together about it. And they, I think, uncovered some kind of damning things about it. So my take on it, first off, is that Lightning Network is the solution going forward to scaling for Bitcoin. I mean, I know last time we talked about they're trying to sort of optimize what gets recorded in the block so that they can squeeze in more transactions. But I mean, will they get to 70? That's still not enough. Will they get to 700? I don't think there's a chance that we'll ever see that on Bitcoin on the layer one. So it seems to me like that's the solution that kind of everybody's decided on. This is how we're going to scale Bitcoin. And in the process, I mean, the report identified some problems. So it sort of is going to create this spoken hub model where you have these big stakers that are in there. Of course, there's problems with that because, the one company that's got 4 million staked made like, $50 per million, which is 0.005% return annually, when they could go to any money maker or any wealth manager and get a 5% return that'll give them $50,000 instead of 50. So like, how is that going to work? I mean, who's going to want to hold their Bitcoin in Lightning Network when they could, give it to some DeFi company that's going to earn them even 2 to 5% interest, which I think is pretty common and probably very sustainable. So I think it's going to have liquidity issues there. They talked about privacy. Most of them only make one hop. So if you've infiltrated the kind of the one hop, I'm forgetting the terminology, but whoever it is that you're passing it off to, the privacy's gone basically. Now they said they could fix that by kind of setting a default that you do 3 or more hops, and it wouldn't add that much to the fees. And as I'm reading through this, it's like, okay, I watched Andreas Antonopoulos. I think he's sort of pretty widely viewed as the expert on Bitcoin and so forth. And I know you've had him on the show before, and I did a video kind of countering a lot of the arguments and so forth that he put together. He's real big on, well, it has to be censorship resistant. Well, it has to be, all of these properties. And in order to go to Lightning Network, you're giving up censorship resistance because you're centralizing the network. You're giving up custody of your assets. I mean, I have no doubt that they're going to, just like with Ethereum and the mining pools that, we talked about where you could throw in less than 32, there's going to be a day where you just buy Bitcoin on the Lightning Network and it's kind of this hosted solution. Well, it's almost like in my view, you've abandoned the principles as to why Bitcoin in the first place. So what do you think about all that?
So I think Bitcoin has taken on this digital gold kind of narrative, and it's when you invent something, like when you invent the internet and you think you know what it's going to be used for, but who could have guessed what it was going to be used for 20, 30 years later? And maybe cat videos was the most popular thing, but I think Bitcoin as the base layer money is kind of almost what the world needs the most at the moment. Like, the world doesn't necessarily need a new payments network. I think a lot of people would argue with central banks printing money, unstable financial system, negative interest rates, having a currency which can't be printed, like that's become really important. And hopefully on top of that, like we have Visa and MasterCard, Stripe, Venmo on top of the US dollar, on top of fiat currencies, we are still trying to build other systems on top of this base layer currency. So the liquid sidechain is very much a centralized hub and spoke model, which is different to Lightning, and all these exchanges can now send coins to each other. So that has freed up a lot of load because so many transactions are between exchanges. I think it was something like 70% I read, or something crazy.
Oh, wow. Okay. And that's just arbitrage, people moving.
Yeah, big traders. A lot of them use Tether. Now we've got Tether on Tron, Ethereum, as well as Omni. I think Algorand launched Tron, Tether as well. So yeah, the Lightning Network. I think that study said that 80% of transactions go through the main 10 channels or something like that. So it was very centralized. I think that's kind of true at the moment because of the way it works. So some of the things that they're hoping to solve with that is if I've got $100 and I want to send you $100 and there's only that one big hub in the middle of us, they want to make it so you can send to 5 nodes that all have a $20 capacity. And you sort of you route it out and then go
guard your transaction basically,
something like that. So they're the sort of things that are coming. We want it's actually very private, even though it is centralized. We still don't know who these nodes are, so you're kind of trusting them to some degree. And I know that's not perfect yet, but there are a lot of things in the works. And even on the Bitcoin public chain, something like Dandelion, where you propagate your transaction to a node, and then it propagates to 3 or 4 other nodes and before actually sending it to the whole network. So it looks like a dandelion. That is one of the privacy things that they're trying to add. I do think we will see backwards compatible privacy on Bitcoin, so they don't need to do a hard fork. Some of these other things they're working on, like Schnorr and Taproot and Mast, what these kind of do is aggregate all the signatures. And again, something that they're talking about that's going to happen within the next 12 to 24 months, transactions that are non-urgent that can be batched together. At the end of the day, an exchange might say, well, we're sending out all our withdrawals at the end of the day now, and they can sign all those transactions. So you might say 1,000 transactions, and that actually gets aggregated into one signature. So that might actually take Bitcoin throughput up to 1,000 transactions per second using these techniques. And at that stage, it becomes a lot cheaper for the exchanges or for businesses to do that. So now they've got that game theory incentive where fees go down, and it adds privacy because you're aggregating 1,000 transactions into one. So they're the I guess hoped scaling solutions that are coming in the next 12 to 24 months.
When it comes to privacy, the way I think of it is this: if I take the world-renowned privacy, blockchain, cryptography experts, and I put them in the room and I say, you guys go in there and come up with your best privacy based solution, blockchain solution, 100%, they are not going to come out and say, okay, see, what we do first is we create this public blockchain where all the transactions are visible and you can see everybody's addresses. So that's why I go to something like Monero or Elixir, where they started from the ground up. We're a privacy token, and we want to stay decentralized and distributed as best we can. And we actively, fork the network to ensure that's the priority. Yeah, there are all these solutions, but there's also a lot of ways that, I saw with Mimblewimble and, Ethereum, or sorry, not Ethereum, but Litecoin really crashed and burned last year and had nothing going on for development for a long time. I think they were trying to really downplay that. Oh, no, everything's fine as the ship's sinking. And recently they finally got some funding raised and got someone to implement Mimblewimble. But at the same time, you see, this guy that went out and I think for $80 in Amazon cloud hosting, he was able to de-anonymize this huge chunk of the transactions. So it's never as clean or as good of a solution as something that's just strictly focused on privacy and built from the ground up for privacy. So I really see those kind of like a Monero or an Elixir being the kind of go-to solution for digital cash.
You definitely need a large anonymity set, as you say. There's no point if you and I are the only two people that are trying to be private and they can see the other 99% of transactions, they can just say, oh, well, we know it's those two that are trying to be private. So that's where hopefully that game theory of far lower fees, everyone's doing it, it's getting built into wallets, it's the default on exchanges after you buy your crypto. Maybe that starts to make Bitcoin, private by default over time.
Maybe, but again, private to who? To you and I, versus other consumers' transactions, yes. To the government who can force the exchanges to install their spyware, maybe not. I don't know. I don't know enough about the solutions to answer that, but
that's the biggest debate. Yeah. I did a video 2 years ago saying the biggest headwind for crypto that no one's talking about is privacy, and that Bitcoin and Ethereum are planning on implementing privacy in the next 2 years. And here we are at this stage, and governments are really starting to crack down on privacy and monitoring. And who's the company that work really closely with the government now? Like I was kind of surprised that all these maximalists are kind of excited that Chainalysis is working with the government. I just don't understand that. I'm sure that's not all of them, but oh yeah, that's the debate of our time, isn't it? Even Facebook and Google and data and whatnot. So yeah,
it is.
Well,
all right.
I think that's just about everything.
Yeah.
That was great to catch up. I certainly learned a lot again today. There's so much to cover, isn't there? I mean,
there is. It's picking up. Do the charts. I know you do a lot of like charting and TA type stuff, don't you? What the XRP charts? Do you see like this bull run imminent as a lot of the XRP TA guys do? And does that look the same for Ethereum and Bitcoin with the halving and all that going on?
Yeah, I tweeted the other day that I'm not normally that bullish on XRP, but actually the rounding, long, grinding bottom it's put in, the risk to reward now is starting to look pretty favorable if we can break up. The only thing that kind of worries me, and this was back from 2014-15, is the coins that had a lot of excitement, and I will say retail investors piled in, and that works in Ripple's favor, XRP, for and against it, because the same thing's going to happen, the unit bias. When we have the next wave of retail speculation, they log into Coinbase and they see that XRP is 30 cents or they see Bitcoin's $10,000. We're going to have a disproportionate amount of people buy whatever they think is cheapest and can go up the most. So that at the moment, I think that there are actually a lot of bag holders for some of these low cap cheap alts from the last cycle. And remember, if you go down 90% and then you go down to 99%, it's just so hard. You need it to go back up 1,000% to get back to that original price versus just needing it to go up, 100% and whatnot. So the maths of it comes into it, and that's what we refer to as heavy bags. But I guess the thing that I'd be a little bit worried about with this 10% using the US-Mexico corridor, we're hearing a lot of people are using it and whatnot, but that hasn't been reflected in price at all. Whereas Bitcoin, a lot of the metrics are ticking up and price has done really well. Ethereum, it's done okay, but there's a lot of certainty around ETH 2.0, which I think is fair enough. And we had all the ICOs have to dump all their ETH. Now that's kind of been outweighed by DeFi uptake. So I think that's pretty bright. But you still need that demand for the token to come from somewhere. And at what point do you say, well, hey, there's all these people actually using XRP. The network is bootstrapped with liquidity, but we still haven't seen that translated in price. And that was one of the things that I was worrying about, because every buy equals a sell on the other end. And to me, there's still a lot of that action taking place is a net demand of zero.
So 10% of MoneyGram's payment flows to Mexico is 1.5 million a day. So, I mean, you compare that to the global trade volume, and it's still very, very small. I think it will have to get into the hundreds of millions or billions before it really starts to move the needle. And I think we're still, like the thing that I'm looking for, there's something we could talk about. The thing that I'm really looking for that I think is going to be a huge milestone, and there will probably not even be a news story about it, is when we get 2 or 3 market makers competing in the same on the same exchange. That's when I think there's going to be, the liquidity levels that are needed to really start bringing in the banks, which are the bigger players. That, there was a bank at Swell last year that said they could send $1 billion a day down one corridor. That would totally crash any exchange that lists XRP. It doesn't matter who it is, because it's just not, the network's not there. It's not big enough to do that today. So, it's building and it's coming. What was announced, and then we don't know if it's official or not. It hasn't been confirmed, but that Bank of America is admitting that they're using RippleNet, and the corridor that they're doing is from Mexico to the U.S. So the reverse flow of what MoneyGram's doing. So they might actually be on the other side of some of those MoneyGram transactions. As they're sending money in, they've got companies paying in Mexico, paying companies in the U.S., going in the reverse direction. And that's where I think things can start to really get the ball rolling, and this thing can take off pretty quickly. So that's exciting news. There was a press release that was put out. It got captured by, it came out of Singapore, I forget, a website over there that covers crypto related news. It got pulled back down. I did a video about it. It hasn't been confirmed, but it seemed very, very real, and I think it will be announced, and I think that's going to be big news.
So. I think it would be. I think it would just bring in retail investors, Bank of America and XRP in the same headline. That's good news. That's what you want. One bit of tech.
They have been Ripple has this global payment steering group that they created in 2016. Bank of America is a founding member, so it's not like they're new to Ripple or anything. They've been around guiding the company on how they develop and implement XRPL for a long time.
Yeah. What I was going to say is there's one technology that's interesting that is happening in the world of Ethereum and all the DEXs. We've now seen these DEX aggregators pop up, or comparison sites. So you can plug in your Ledger or your MetaMask Ethereum wallet in your browser, and you can say, I want to swap Ethereum to Kyber or the DAI stablecoin, whatever you want to swap. And it brings up all the different exchanges, the price, the liquidity. But now we've got these aggregators that'll say, you want to buy $1,000, but there's actually only $100 of liquidity on these 10 different exchanges, and it'll spread out. And then, with a click of a button, you've now got that token you wanted on your Ledger hardware wallet. It's really cool stuff what's happening.
How does that work with KYC AML is my question.
So this is the world of decentralization, where you don't know who you're interacting with.
Okay.
So it's a decentralized exchange. So I can be a liquidity provider from my hardware wallet. I can say, well, I've got this ETH. I'm happy to sell it if it goes to $1,000, and I can just leave that order sitting there pre-signed, so to speak, in a smart contract. And when ETH sells, I come home from work that day, and I've got DAI stablecoin or gold, digital gold tokens now. I've taken profits from my $1,000 ETH. So it's awesome to see all this stuff coming.
Yeah, that is. It's going to be a very, very different world. Everybody is. I think there's, the way I described it is there is a digital gold rush on, and there's digital gold laying all around, all over the world, and everybody's scrambling to sort of stake their claim, because you have Bitso. They're getting into like bill pay, which is online banking. I mean, if I've got an exchange and I keep my wealth in crypto because it's sound money and it's going to hold its value better than the peso, and now I can pay bills, why do I need a bank account at that point? And then there's the Peruvian bank that's a RippleNet customer that's using XRP. They're talking about not expanding their physical presence, but taking their digital services to other countries in the region. You've got Bitso's also working to move to implement in Argentina, and of course Brazil. They're ready to go, but they're waiting on regulations. So it's all happening, and I think the traditional banks, if they don't adapt, they're going to end up on the losing end of this deal. So
the things that I'm probably most excited about that can be big catalysts for Ethereum and DeFi are the loans. So at the moment, you've got to over collateralize your loans. We've already got some solutions and projects that have started the under collateralized loans. So I can build up basically a digital credit score, digital trust score, digital identity, and they know that I pay my loan back. Next time it goes down to 90%, 80%, and eventually I can borrow money. Someone else is taking that risk. Another cool project, I think it's called...
Are those insured yet? That's my question.
Yes. So one of my favorite projects this year is doing insurance for all these DeFi contracts. and you can earn money by insuring and collecting fees and whatnot. They did their first 2 payouts the other day in that DeFi hack you probably saw in the news where someone exploited a couple of the contracts and whatnot. Another app that's really cool is streaming your wages. So it's constantly streaming at $1 per minute or a cent per second or whatever your wages are. And you can see that sort of tick around on the clock. Once you know what your wages are, you can actually see if your bills, if you're going backwards in your wealth, but your wages sort of ticking forward, you can say, well, geez, my expenses are more than my income. So we can start to build some really cool concepts once we can see our wages being streamed.
So you're talking like it would, even if you're paying, $8 a month for Netflix, it could actually deduct that at a streaming rate. So you see money going out, money coming in real time.
Yeah,
that is really cool.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'll Google it now just quickly if you've got anything else you want to talk about, Sam, but I'm sure it was called Sablia, but very, very cool concept.
So ILP, that's one of the things that I think is going to be implemented there as well, as far as streaming. I mean, Coil's already doing that with, YouTube, as well. Cinnamon Video is kind of their YouTube streaming platform, video platform. They just opened up to where, as the creator, I can set my video to Coil subscribers only, or I can open it up to the public. So I think that's going to kind of help that ecosystem grow again. I'm trying to figure out, okay, when do I want to release? I take some videos that I spend a lot of time on. I put them on Cinnamon first to let subscribers kind of preview them. And then I release them to YouTube the following day. Now I have to decide, okay, do I want to implement, a change to that strategy, and how do I take advantage of all this? So
yeah, cool.
There's more and more options. I think that's good for us, because it's part of all of this. What's going to come out of it, whether it's ETH or XRP or Bitcoin or whatever, is it's decentralizing, and creators like you and I are going to have more control and more options available to us.
Yeah, that project is called Sablia for anyone that wants to check it out. And a lot of YouTubers got strikes again this week, as you say. So we put all our content up on library.io. Do you do that as well, or? Yeah.
I don't, but I have an account there. I haven't delved into it yet. So
cool. They have an auto sync feature, which is really handy. So it automatically uploads anything you put to YouTube. But I think that's it for today, Sam. That's a good hour. I think we covered awesome topics for people at home. I really enjoyed doing this. If you guys want us to do this every few months when there's enough news about the 3 projects, and I'm sure in a bull market there's going to be heaps of news. So
I suspect as well. Yeah. I enjoyed it, Alex. Thank you.
No worries. Thanks, Sam. See you guys.